YouTube is more recent than public access television. But similar questions and issues come to mind for me when I look at the potentials of YouTube. When public access television went on in around the country, there was at first a good deal of optimism that the sort of grassroots intellectuals who had long been locked out of mediums that could be used to persuade people to a more progressive vision of our society would be like new lights that went on around the country, much to the disappointment of people who hoped that. The most popular television show was called Race and Reason, which was a very mundane and difficult to watch, turgid droning about white supremacy and the threats to our society posed by immigrants, black people, minorities. Well, interestingly, Race and Reason was written by Carlton Puttnam in the book that this was based on Mount Desert Island. And since I was lured to Mount Desert Island in what the British called an experience park, which was really a Holocaust simulation experiment, the second one I was used for, of arguably three. Was the scene of a great deal of radio and communications activities throughout America's Cold War history. So we have a lot invested in, fan excitement when it comes to teams. I'm not especially partial to secret teams as a phrase because it tends to have the opposite effect. It makes you laugh it off. People think it's a conspiracy theory, a term, that was created to address problems in the Kennedy assassination. But we do go in for sports, and we look at teams, and we look at the opposition. That's particularly sad when a great hero like Roberto Clemente gets killed, by the opposition. So, and then we're not allowed to talk about it. Now, various societies put a different premium on freedom of the airwaves. Obviously, when things are tense, the people who want such things shut down have an advantage because it brings to mind you'll provoke, there'll be a brawl, there'll be a fight, a war will break out, things will get nasty if you keep on saying things that are so difficult to accept by the opposition, and you're painted into a corner. In the 80s, when the monster Reagan was in power, I was considered, provoking for questioning his authoritarian stance as a danger to our society. It looked to me like America was being saved by the enemy within. And I was called, a provoker. But, we're talking about people who killed all of our liberals and then added insult to injury, trashing liberals and stuff. And so I was just saying, I'm still here. Like the woman being, insensitively made love to in the Jaws book. Hey, I'm here too, and making me out to be some kind of enemy. I'd be perfectly happy getting along with most of those characters, as long as they're rational, diplomatic people. I have no axe to grind. They're entitled to their beliefs. Just don't hurt, innocent people. Presumably what the ethical basis of our society is. So freedom of speech means something to me. And if you look at the 80s again, Václav Havel, who I disagreed with his chummy friendship with Bush and so forth, but the Czechoslovakian intellectuals had a movement. The freedom of speech meant a great deal to them. It was called Samizdat, Charter 77, and so on. They had plays and poems that it was legal to write, but if you gave it to show to somebody, then you could be arrested. So they had a network of going around, excuse me, I got caught in the rain yesterday. They had a network of going around, hiding these manuscripts, and some of them were arrested, some of them died, elderly people who had as much chance against the Soviet occupation as elderly have against COVID-19. John Patochka was one of these elderly people who died. He was many times Václav Havel would mention him or dedicate his books to him. But the Samizdat movement was important, and interestingly, Prague Spring was used by the extreme autocrats of American society to tar the Soviet Union rightly. I mean, they came in with tanks to crush this, attempt at Czechoslovakian self-assertion. But when the Czech Republic was ultimately liberated by a leader of Charter 77 and his parliamentarianism arguments, some of the leaders of Prague Spring came to America and began teaching. Ivan Svitek, for example, was leader of Prague Spring, a great Czech nationalist, who believed in democracy, and he was also a man of the people. He espoused Marxism, and of course people were like, what do you mean? It was Marxists that brought the Soviet Union out. They're the ones that kicked them out. And he said, you try to tell somebody in America this, and it's like telling the medieval church that the earth revolves around the sun. They can't grasp that, there's something to be said for the idea of worker participation and the fruits of their labor. I don't really understand how that could be lost on so many people, but it had its roots in the Samizdat movement, freedom of speech, the right to talk. And so ironically, the same friction, the same cancellation of our society is tarred and feathered in America. You're saying the earth revolves around the sun. I'm just saying that some of the Marxist beliefs have certain resonance. Some of them have value. You should look at them. And of course, this has the antithetical effect of saying, well, that proves you're a liberal, and that's why we had to shoot at Kennedy and so forth. It doesn't really make that much sense. But in public education in the early years in the 60s, places like WQED had public television, and it was tediously boring. That's very sad, because education is dramatic. It's very exciting. And it seemed to serve as an object lesson. You don't really want that. You want to sing along with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the excitement. You don't want to go into understanding things. That's wrong for your branch of society, the people who are in the lower middle class and so forth. So the importance of radio and television um, and access to these things um, was sort of targeted. And there was a lot of control already in place as a result of the Cold War by teams that can be identified. You know, you had listening posts around the country. And Mount Desert Island, where the book Race and Reason was written about, was one of the most important listening posts during the Cold War. The Rockefellers had helped build it. And if you look at the Google maps of this area, you have Staten Island. Now, Michael Payne had Oswald's rifle in his garage 24/7, 8 days a week. Oswald went to visit his wife on Sunday, not his rifle. Well, this Michael Payne, who had Oswald's rifle in his garage, had a father named George Lyman Payne who used to sail with the Rockefellers up in this area. And Rockefellers also owned Swan Island off of Honduras, which was used for operations and psychological warfare during the, various wars that went on in Central America, often at the instigation of United Fruit, Allen Dulles, friends of Adolf Hitler in the American intelligence community. After World War II, of course, the Gestapo lined up like pigs at a trough to get jobs with the CIA. And one of the most notorious figures, Reinhard Gehlen, who was an East Europe Gestapo leader of some sort, Secret Service or something. He was a terrifying individual that the Russians hated and were absolutely determined to get. America disguised him and evacuated him. And he was adopted. He was one of the people who, in something that's starting to get around called Operation Paperclip, that, brought these CIA agents to America and shot Kennedy because he wanted them put to, an honest profession. There was a clear picture being painted in his strategy for peace in 1959 that he viewed Allen Dulles as his opposition, not so much Richard Nixon, because he didn't believe in domino theory. He believed in independence movements around the world. He thought that the Soviets were trying to recover from a terrible invasion, and they had a containment policy, make sure it didn't happen again. But domino theory, he just dismissed it. I mean, he said, the South Vietnamese are mistreating the Buddhists. These people want an independence movement. So you got these radio stations and listening posts set up for black operations, and one of the most important of these was an outgrowth of something that developed in the Mount Desert Island area called Otter Cliffs Radio. It was on the cliffs of Maine, so it could detect on the waters distress signals and so forth from the Navy. And they negotiated a lot of what went on in the ultimate resolution of World War One, and continued to exist for decades. So the idea of a listening post being set up in Mount Desert Island and being at the center of how I was lured there shows that the script, that the Texas school book, the basic gist of it is only two people would know if you murdered somebody when they were an embryo, you and the embryo. And only me and this person who wrote the script know that his machine has listening posts, listening to Hot Lips Radio in people's bedrooms and proving their thesis that the liberal is initiating, not health care in sexual matrimony, but criminal activity. So they have the right to invade not just the home, but the mind with radio if necessary to straighten this out, because abortion is murder. Now, the release of AIDS, which is what was going on there, a war game about it called Two Virgins, um, was a military operation by people who don't like civilian society. And it wasn't worked out. I mean, Congress is in mixed feelings about it. Abortion. And they're not going to admit that this happened, but it did. There's a place in Pittsburgh called the Listening Post. And my Jewish half brother was given the initials AFC, like AFC Electronics. So they tortured me out of radio when they kidnapped and tortured me as a child. But then they started, spinal tapping various locations to get like a picture that they impacted using neurological injury. And and it was like a carousel club Maryland blow-up doll, Jim Kennedy. Everybody wants to get their hands on Jim Kennedy. So it was like a circus freak act, and they made no secret of it. They were calling me a freak. Obama's Afghanistan war director, his namesake, in my Temple class was this kid who was always calling me a freak, or his friends were always calling me a freak. And so you have this idea in the script of me putting up a false face or a persona. And of course the persona is the liberal public relations, presenting himself as something other than Mr. Hyde, the Dr. Jekyll side of the liberal pornographer. And of course it's sort of silliness. They came on with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, to try to drum up this kind of licentiousness after Martin Luther King was killed. Now they're preaching. So the military clearly doesn't like civilians a lot of the time, and they have these social networks that are intended to, save us by the enemy within method. Supposedly we're the enemy within, the Satan within our psyches and so forth. So they want to set up radios in our psyches and so forth. And people do work hard, and words like anti-Marxism can become coded resentment words for how hard we have to work. But one of the reasons we have to work so hard is because we've been whipped and badgered into spending too much of our tax money on senseless weapons. And if you look at the situation that has developed in Mount Desert Island, you see that the behavioral modification issue that comes with COVID-19, getting us to stand separately from each other, stand apart, has certain kinds of ramifications in other things that are going on in Bar Harbor, like the mouse research. John Calhoun said that when mouse populations get too populated, they start turning on each other as cannibals. So there's sort of an implicit argument that overpopulation justifies these things. But if you look at the team that's involved in killing Kennedy and the radio stations in Bar Harbor, you find people, as I say, like Michael Payne's father, who had the weapon in his garage, and the Moranship, the white Russian who knew both Oswald and Jackie Kennedy. He also knew George Bush. And the whole idea of these radio stations being coordinated by the CIA gets interesting because Alan Dulles, it gets interesting in terms of Hollywood, because Alan Dulles put Cecil B. DeMille, the biblicist in charge of Radio Free Europe, while his brother John Foster Dulles was freeing Unit 7, what was it, I think it's Unit 713. I think it's Unit 713. From Japan. They were notorious, worse than the Gestapo, if you can imagine them, because of the sadism that Germany and Japan have. Japan has this like bent to be sadistic sometimes, and so you have the biblicists and these people who were in germ warfare all being forgiven by the Dulles brothers, and a biblicist being put in charge of Radio Free Europe by a gang who went on to execute JFK, example him. And, the first shot was to his throat. And then the killers, which has been shown to have the pattern of what happened in Dealey Plaza, Reagan's last film. Reagan says when committing a felony, I'll do all the talking.